The apartment was quiet, save for the rhythmic scribble of a crayon against paper. David sat hunched at the tiny kitchen table, elbows resting on the worn wood, eyes tired and unfocused. Across from him, his 5-year-old son, Max, was deep in concentration, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth as he colored a stick-figure family holding hands beneath a crooked sun. David forced a smile watching his son. Max didn't seem to notice the way the wind rattled the poorly sealed windows or the way the light bulb flickered overhead. He didn't know how close they were to running out of everything. David knew. He glanced toward the kitchen shelf. There, sitting lonely in the corner, was a single can of baked beans. No bread, no milk, no cereal, just that one dented can, the last of the emergency stash that had once been a full pantry. He'd been out of work for 3 months, laid off when the auto shop downsized. Since then, it had been a steady decline, savings eaten away, bills pushed aside, eviction notices narrowly avoided thanks to grace periods and careful begging. He'd applied for jobs every day: delivery driver, warehouse loader, janitor, even overnight security, anything, but nothing stuck. Every rejection email chipped away at what was left of his pride. He tried not to let Max see the weight he carried. But 5-year-olds are more observant than adults give them credit for. Max knew things weren't the same. His dad didn't smile as much anymore. They played fewer games. There were more peanut butter crackers and fewer dinners at the little diner with the balloon animals and jukebox. David reached for the can and turned it in his hands. It wasn't much, but it was enough for one small meal. He could split it with Max, maybe boil some water and stretch it into a soup. Just one more night, he thought. Tomorrow might bring something new, an interview, a callback, a miracle. As he stood to fetch the can opener, there was a knock at the door. It startled him. Nobody came by unannounced. No family, no friends nearby. He glanced through the peephole. A woman stood on the other side, wrapped in a tattered coat that looked 3 sizes too large. Her hair was tangled, face pale under the flickering hallway light. She looked young, maybe late 20s, but with eyes that had seen too much. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay quiet, to protect Max, to conserve what little they had. But something in the woman's face, something raw and vulnerable, made him open the door a crack. "Please," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I haven't eaten in 3 days. I just need something. Anything." David's grip tightened on the doorknob. The can of beans was still on the table behind him. His stomach churned, part hunger, part indecision. This was all he had left. He looked at Max, who had paused his coloring and was now watching them both with wide, curious eyes. "I have a child," David said quietly, not to excuse himself, but to make her understand the stakes. The woman's eyes flicked toward Max and filled with tears. She nodded, stepping back. "I understand. I'm sorry." She turned to leave, and David heard himself say, "Wait." He didn't know why. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Maybe it was the way Max was watching, learning from him in real time. Or maybe it was because he'd once been desperate enough to knock on a stranger's door himself. He opened the door wide. "Come in, it's not much, but—" He swallowed hard. "I have something." The woman entered slowly, cautiously, as if afraid the offer might be revoked at any moment. David heated the beans in a scratched saucepan, while Max brought over 2 spoons. They didn't have extra bowls, so he served the woman first and let her eat from the pot. She didn't speak, just cried as she ate, quietly and gratefully. Max offered her his crayon drawing when she finished, saying, "It's a happy picture, so you don't feel sad." She took it like it was made of gold. When she left, she whispered, Thank you. I won't forget this. David stood at the door long after it closed. The apartment was quiet again. The can was gone. His stomach ached, but something else stirred in his chest. Something deeper than hunger. Something that felt a little like hope. He didn't know it yet, but that one small act would come back to him in a way that would change everything. The wind had picked up outside, howling through the narrow cracks in the apartment's thin walls. David pulled Max's blanket up to his chin and kissed his forehead gently. The boy had fallen asleep quickly after their quiet evening, unaware of his father's inner torment. David had managed to drink a glass of water to calm the growl in his stomach, but his mind refused to rest. He sat by the window, the can of beans now an empty memory in the sink. The room felt colder, lonelier. The weight of his decision to give it away gnawed at him, not because he regretted the kindness, but because he was afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Hunger, weakness, helplessness. He turned the old radio dial out of habit. Static, jazz, weather. He clicked it off. Just as he stood to go to bed, a second knock came at the door, firm but not forceful. His heart leapt. At this hour, cautiously, he tiptoed toward the door and peeked through the peephole. It was her, the woman from earlier. Only now she stood straighter. Her posture was no longer hunched from cold or shame. Her clothes were still the same, tattered coat, frayed sleeves, but her eyes, they were clearer, determined. David opened the door halfway. "You okay?" She nodded, clutching a bundle in her arms, wrapped in a plastic bag. I wanted to return something." He raised an eyebrow. She reached into the bag and pulled out a folded blanket, a granola bar, and a bottle of water. "I found a shelter tonight. They gave me some things. It's not much, but I wanted to repay you." David stared, stunned. The granola bar alone would be a small feast right now. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted gently. "You gave when you had nothing. No one does that. Not anymore." He accepted the items, heart thudding. "Thank you." Her lips trembled, eyes glassy. "You and your son reminded me I'm still human. I was losing that kindness. It brought me back." David didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, clutching the small treasures in his hands. He offered her a place to stay for the night, but she shook her head. "I've got a place for now, but I'll be back in the morning. There's something I need to do." Then she turned and disappeared into the night again. David barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the granola bar untouched on the nightstand. He thought of the woman's eyes, how pain had been replaced with a kind of fire, a clarity that hadn't been there before. What could she possibly bring in the morning? Max stirred once, muttering in his sleep, curling tighter under the covers. David pulled the blanket over his son and tucked it gently around him. The old fatherly instinct had never left. Protect, shield, love. When dawn painted the walls with pale orange light, David was already up, having washed his face and cleaned the table. He didn't know why, but he had the overwhelming urge to be presentable, like something important was about to happen. A soft knock echoed. He opened the door to find her again, but this time she didn't come empty-handed. In her arms was a large envelope and a small duffel bag. "I didn't want to wake your son," she whispered, "but I couldn't wait." David stepped aside, letting her in. She handed him the envelope first. "Open it." Inside were neatly organized papers, a check, business cards, and a typed letter addressed to Mr. David Reyes. He frowned, reading the contents. His hands trembled. The check was real. $10,000. The business card bore the name Elena Vance, CEO, Willowbridge Ventures Foundation. He looked up. "I don't understand." "I wasn't always on the street," Elena said softly. Life unraveled. I stepped away from my position for a while to deal with grief, addiction. I went down a path I didn't think I'd come back from. David was speechless. The night you gave me that meal, you didn't know who I was, and that's what made it matter more. She explained how the foundation helped families in crisis, how they had resources, grants, job placement programs, community aid, how she now had a renewed mission, and David had reminded her of its purpose. I can offer you a lifeline, she said. Not charity, a partnership. You'll do the work, but I can open the door. David sat down heavily. It was too much, too fast. Elena continued, This check is just to get you stabilized. Pay rent, buy food, clothes, whatever you and your boy need. The rest, the job training, interviews, referrals, that's ready when you are. Max came out rubbing his eyes just then. Daddy. David looked at Elena. She smiled. Let's change both our stories. That night, after Elena left and the door quietly clicked shut, David leaned against it and let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. $10,000. Real. The check sat on the table like something too fragile to touch. Max was back to coloring now, happier than he'd been in weeks. A granola bar wrapper lay discarded nearby, half of it saved for later, per Max's clever thinking. David had tried to explain a little, but he didn't have the words yet. How do you explain that fate knocked twice? Dinner that night was simple. Instant noodles with some fresh vegetables from a nearby corner shop. Elena had insisted on taking them grocery shopping first thing in the morning. David accepted. For tonight they would rest. But rest didn't come easily. David sat on the balcony wrapped in a thin blanket, watching the moon rise over the rooftops. His mind kept flashing back to all the sleepless nights. The job rejections, the sacrifices, the hunger in his gut wasn't just physical anymore. It had become a metaphor, a hunger for purpose, for redemption, for hope. And now a stranger he had once fed was offering him everything he had dared not dream of. He wasn't sure if it was luck, destiny, or something greater, but he knew this: he would not waste this second chance. Tomorrow the real work will begin. The first rays of morning filtered through the threadbare curtains like golden fingers, soft and persistent. David awoke with a strange lightness in his chest, as though he had been holding his breath for months and had finally exhaled. He stretched slowly, feeling every ache from the tension that had lived in his body far too long. Max was still asleep, curled up under a proper blanket for once. David had tucked him in with a new fleece throw they'd bought last night, something soft and warm. The boy's peaceful face was a reminder that today maybe things would finally start to change. The envelope Elena had left sat on the table beside a neat pile of papers. David picked it up again, making sure it hadn't vanished in the night like a dream. But it was still there, real, tangible, and heavy with promise. He checked the check again, rereading the amount. He hadn't dared deposit it yet. Part of him still feared the bank would laugh him out the door, tell him it was a prank, a mistake. A knock broke his thoughts. Not loud, not urgent, but firm and intentional. He opened the door slowly. Elena stood there holding a tray with 2 paper cups of coffee and a paper bag. She wore a simple jacket, her hair tied back in a ponytail, her face refreshed but serious. "Hope you're ready," she said with a smile. "I come bearing breakfast and a plan." David stepped aside and she walked in like she belonged, not intrusively, but with a grace that made it seem like she'd been there before. She handed him the coffee and opened the bag to reveal still warm breakfast sandwiches. "For both of you," she said. "Max, awake yet?" "He will be soon. You didn't have to do this." I know, she replied, but I wanted to. Besides, you'll need energy. David arched an eyebrow. For what? Elena pulled out a folder and opened it on the table. Inside were printed emails, appointment confirmations, and an organized checklist. We've got you signed up for 2 things today. First, we're visiting one of our partner employment centers. They help vet candidates for trade work, tech apprenticeships, even management training. Based on your background at the auto shop and what I read in your resume, I think they'll love you. David blinked. My resume? She smiled coyly. You left an old version in your job application folder online. I might have made some edits and sent it over. You did all that already? Elena nodded. You gave away your last meal to a stranger. Least I could do is fill in a few bullet points. David sat down, trying to absorb the pace of it all. He hadn't had direction like this in months. No plan, no structure, just survival. Now someone was handing him not just hope, but steps. Real, actionable steps. What's the second thing? He asked. Max, she said, nodding toward the bedroom. He needs a stable routine, so I've arranged a visit at a nearby community preschool that partners with the foundation. You're going to need time to work, train, and breathe. They have scholarships. We'll cover it. David swallowed hard. He wasn't used to people doing things for him, especially not this much. This is a lot. Yes, Elena agreed. It's a lot of good, and you deserve it. They shared breakfast quietly. When Max wandered out rubbing his eyes and saw the sandwiches, he beamed. David watched his son eat, the boy's innocence and joy intact, and he knew something deep in his soul. This was the first morning in a long time that didn't feel like a fight for survival. It felt like a step toward living again. Later that day, after dropping Max off at the community preschool and completing his intake session at the employment center, David sat alone at the neighborhood park. The folder Elena had given him was open in his lap, the envelope still tucked into the side pocket. He had yet to deposit the check. It wasn't fear that stopped him now, but awe. It represented more than money. It was a symbol of belief. Elena's belief in him, in what he could rebuild. He pulled out the typed letter from the envelope again. Dear David, you don't know me beyond my name, but I know enough about you to write this with confidence. Kindness like yours is rare. Most people only give when they have extra. You gave when you had none. That told me everything I needed to know. This check is not a handout. It is a bridge, meant to carry you and Max across a very dangerous river. I've been on the other side of that river. I nearly drowned in it. Someone once saved me. Now I choose to save others. You are part of that mission now. I hope you'll take it. Sincerely, Elena Vance, CEO, Willow Bridge Ventures Foundation. He read the letter 3 times before carefully refolding it and placing it back inside. Then he finally stood, folder in hand, and walked to the nearby bank. Inside, the teller smiled politely. David handed over his ID and the check. The woman stared at the check for a moment, her professional expression slipping slightly. Is this a settlement? She asked. David shook his head. Something like that. She nodded and began processing the deposit. As the receipt printed, David felt a strange sensation roll over him. Not relief, not exactly. Something deeper, empowerment, confidence, a sense of standing back up after being knocked down again and again. When he walked out of that bank, he wasn't the same man who had gone in. Back at the apartment, David placed the receipt next to the envelope on the counter and sat down. He picked up the business card Elena had given him again. Elena Vance, CEO. Beneath it, the words, "Restoring Futures, One Life at a Time." He flipped the card over. On the back, handwritten in blue ink, was a simple note. "There's more coming. You haven't even seen what you're capable of yet." The words stirred something in him. Pride, fear, excitement. Later that evening, Max returned from his first day at preschool with a smile so big it seemed to light up the room. He talked about painting blocks, a girl named Lily who liked dinosaurs, and snack time with animal crackers. David listened with full attention, amazed at how quickly children adapt. Max didn't seem to miss their old routines. He was already building new ones, unburdened by fear. After Max fell asleep, David took out his old laptop and opened the email account he hadn't used in months. To his surprise, he had 5 new emails. 3 were job inquiries from the center Elena had sent his resume to. 1 was a request for an interview, and the 5th, an invitation to speak at a Willow Bridge fundraiser event in 2 weeks. Elena had added a note. "People need to hear from someone who understands. Don't be modest. Be real." David stared at the screen. His hands trembled again, but this time not from fear. His life was no longer unraveling. It was finally being stitched back together. David stood outside the Willow Bridge Ventures headquarters, staring up at the sleek glass building that seemed to shimmer in the early afternoon sun. It was the kind of place he used to walk past, without ever imagining he might one day walk into. It looked more like the setting for a tech startup or a major finance firm than a non-profit, but maybe that was the point. Hope, it seemed, deserved architecture that reflected its strength. He took a deep breath, adjusted the sleeves of his newly pressed shirt, courtesy of a clothing voucher Elena had provided, and walked through the sliding doors. The lobby was quiet, filled with natural light and polished wood floors. At the front desk, a smiling receptionist greeted him. "Mr. Reyes?" "That's me," David replied, offering a tentative smile. "Elena's waiting for you upstairs." He was led through a security turnstile and into a quiet elevator. The floor numbers blinked slowly. 2, 3, 4, 10. When the doors opened, he stepped into a warmly lit office space that contrasted the building's sleek exterior. It felt personal, real. Walls were decorated with photos of families, handwritten thank you notes, and framed newspaper articles about the foundation's work. Elena appeared around the corner, dressed in slacks and a blouse, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "I figured you might need something familiar," she said, offering one to him. David laughed softly. "You're right." They sat down in her office, which was more like a cozy study than a corporate suite. Books lined the walls, titles on psychology, leadership, trauma recovery, and a few well-worn novels. "You're probably wondering why I wanted to see you today," she said. David nodded. "Besides the email about that fundraiser?" Elena leaned forward, folding her hands. "Yes, that's part of it. But really, I wanted you to see where this all comes from. I wanted you to know the people behind the program, and more importantly, the stories. Stories like yours." She stood and gestured for him to follow. They walked through a hallway where dozens of framed photos told the story of Willow Bridge. Families reuniting, individuals in recovery, job placement graduations, and children laughing at community events. "I started this foundation after I got clean," she explained. "After I clawed my way back from rock bottom, a man I barely knew gave me a meal and told me, if someone believes in you, you have to believe in yourself too." It stayed with me. David was silent, overwhelmed. "You reminded me of him," she continued, "and of myself. So I want to offer you more than just support. I want to offer you a role." "A role?" he repeated. Elena smiled. "Public outreach, peer support, storytelling. You don't need to become a motivational speaker, but your voice could move others. We can train you, pay you, and help you help others." David looked down at his coffee. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt seen, needed, useful. He looked back at Elena. "I'm in." David didn't expect his first few weeks with the foundation to feel so natural. Yet each day he found himself sliding into his new role with a surprising sense of purpose. He split his time between training sessions, community center visits, and sitting on panel interviews for new applicants who needed the same kind of break he had once prayed for. Max, too, had blossomed. His preschool teacher, Miss Kayla, said he was bright, creative, and unusually empathetic for a boy his age. He often told stories about the day Dad saved the bean lady, and once even brought in a crayon drawing titled, "When We Shared Everything." David printed it and taped it to his small cubicle wall at Willow Bridge. The job wasn't glamorous. Some days were emotionally heavy, especially hearing stories from others who had suffered even more deeply. But it was real work, work that mattered. David helped write new orientation materials, sat in on fundraising brainstorming sessions, and even attended job fairs to speak with struggling parents. Elena coached him through the public speaking, helping him frame his story not as a sob story, but as a testimony, a transformation. He still hadn't touched the rest of the money from the check. After paying rent and bills and buying essentials for Max, he kept the remainder in a savings account. His first paycheck from Willowbridge felt like a badge of honor. One day, after a long community outreach event, Elena handed him a stack of forms. "These are our mentorship program applications. I want you to pick one." David blinked. "You want me to mentor someone already?" "You're ready, and you'll know who needs you when you read it." David stayed late that night, going through each story, and then he found it. A single father of two, recently unemployed, living out of his car, afraid to ask for help because of pride. David circled the application. 2 weeks later, David stood in the Willowbridge community kitchen, stirring a large pot of chili alongside Max, who had been officially designated the Pepper Sprinkles Master. They were helping set up for a Friday evening family dinner, something the foundation held monthly. As the aroma of spices filled the air, Elena walked in and gave him a small nod. "Someone's here to see you." David wiped his hands on a towel and stepped out to the hallway. And there she was. Not Elena. Her, the woman from that first knock, the stranger who had changed everything. She looked different, healthier, glowing even. She wore a modest outfit and carried a canvas bag full of what looked like groceries and toys. "Hey," she said, eyes shining. "Hey, I wanted to return something." David tilted his head, confused. She opened the bag and pulled out Max's old crayon drawing, the one she had taken that night. It was creased, but preserved. "This kept me going." David swallowed hard. "You look good, really good." "I'm back on my feet," she said. "I'm working, I'm clean, and I volunteer at a shelter in the evenings." One of them mentioned Willowbridge, and I knew I had to come. David invited her inside. Max recognized her immediately and gave her a shy wave. As she knelt down to say hello, David realized something. His story had come full circle, and he wasn't the only one it had touched. This wasn't just recovery, it was a reunion, renewal, and maybe the beginning of something even greater.